I can guarantee you success with a cold email if you can understand one core concept. Unfortunately, it's not a shortcut or a hack, and it's not the sexiest method, but you can rely on it to solve your outbound problems 100% of the time. I was once told that stories engage multiple parts of the brain, making it easier to learn and understand concepts. So I've taken the liberty to make a story to illustrate this framework. Myra had built her entire career on one belief. She was a damn good baker. Not just good, exceptional. Her small bakery, tucked away on a quiet street, had a loyal following. People came for her flaky croissants, her delicate pastries, her warm, crusty bread. But Myra wasn't interested in just being another neighbourhood baker. She wanted something bigger. When the Royal Palace announced a competition to find the country's next master baker, someone whose work would be served at state banquets and royal festivals, Myra knew this was her shot. The challenge was simple: bake the most extraordinary cake anyone had ever tasted. She wasn't worried. She had spent years perfecting her craft, so she pulled out an old recipe, one that had been used by master bakers for decades, a foolproof cake. She followed it exactly, precise measurements, careful technique, left nothing to chance. But when she pulled it from the oven, her stomach tightened. It was dense, dry, overcooked on the edges, but underdone in the centre. She stared at it, trying to make sense of what had gone wrong. She'd followed the damn recipe. Her assistant, Leo, leaned over and broke off a piece. He chewed slowly. Maybe it's just a bad recipe. This recipe has won awards. It's been tested 100 times. Then why does it taste like disappointment? She exhaled, pushing her frustration aside. That was the real question, wasn't it? She looked around at her tiny bakery. The palace kitchens had state-of-the-art ovens with perfect heat control. She had an unpredictable old gas stove that ran too hot. They had the finest imported flour. She had whatever she could afford from the local mill. The recipe had been designed for a different environment. She could curse her equipment, she could complain that the palace bakers had better tools, or she could fix the damn recipe. So she started breaking it down. The cake was too dry. She adjusted the fat to flour ratio. The centre collapsed. That meant her oven was too hot. She lowered the temperature and baked it longer. The texture was too dense. She needed more air in the batter. On her second attempt, it was better, but still not great. Her third attempt was promising, but still off. By her 9th attempt, she was close. By her 15th attempt, even closer. Meanwhile, other bakers were dropping out of the competition. Some had failed once and given up. Others had stubbornly baked the same recipe over and over, expecting a different outcome. But Myra, she refused to make the same mistake twice. On her 21st attempt, she pulled the cake from the oven and sliced into it. The crumb was perfect, soft but structured. The flavour was balanced, deep, complex, and unforgettable. She let Leo taste it. He took a bite, paused, then grinned. The next day she brought it to the palace. The judges took a single bite and exchanged glances. The head chef set down his fork, turned to the king, and simply said, "We've found our baker." That night, the royal banquet was filled with her cakes. Myra stood in the corner, watching, as dignitaries and nobility took second, third, and fourth bites. She had done it. Not because she had the best oven, not because she had the rarest ingredients, but because she had failed and paid attention. Failing and paying attention is the essence of the scientific method. The scientific method is a structure for improving over time by looking at your results and using that to tweak the process that you went through to get those results. This works for inventing light bulbs, getting rockets to the moon, baking cakes, and also cold email. I'm now going to dive into my computer and show you a diagram, and I think this is the most important diagram in cold email. You've got your inputs, very straight line. We're going to say these are in, and then they're going to go through a process. I'm going to draw the process as a triangle, and then that's going to result in some outputs, okay? Seems very vague right now. So I'm just going to put pro here, so then it's a process. So in Myra's case, baking the cake, the inputs would have been the flour, the sugar, the eggs, the cinnamon, whatever other ingredients you're putting together to put into this cake. The process then is going to be, what temperature you set the oven at. Okay, it's going to be how long you bake the cake for, how long you let it sit. Do you mix the wet and dry ingredients separately and then put them together. When do you add the icing? So that's the process that the ingredients go through, and then you're going to get an output, okay? And then what happens is I'm just going to draw a big box here. So this all happens within an environment. So what I mean by an environment is that there's certain factors that affect the inputs or the process from the outside that you cannot control, okay? So we're saying in Mara's case, she couldn't control her oven, right? She didn't have perfect heat control on her oven. And because of that, that's an outside factor that she can't change in this story, which means that it affects her process, okay? So essentially what we're saying here is she went and had, got a recipe, right? A recipe that had been tried 100 times, right? But that recipe had a certain environment, which was that, the palace bakers had perfect heat control in the ovens and way better equipment. It also had slightly different inputs, high quality flour, this sorts of things. So because of that, even though she put it through the process, the output was wrong, okay? The output wasn't the cake that she wanted. So what you do with this, you essentially take the output, and then you use that to diagnose what's either wrong with the inputs or wrong with the process, okay? And you make a diagnosis and you say, hey, I think we are using the wrong type of sugar here, right? You change that, you put it through again, then you taste it again. That solved it. But now we're having this problem. And then you keep doing that until the output is what you want, right? And you can just follow this iteration after iteration after iteration after iteration, like Mara did, to essentially bake the cake that you want. And you can do the same with cold email. So what are the inputs? Okay? The inputs essentially are the lead list. Okay? So you can change the lead list, the stuff you're putting in, or you can change what you do to that lead list to generate calls. Or even in this case, I'm going to say close deals. Okay? I'm going to say, yes, we're talking about outbound, but really what we care about is how many deals our clients are closing, because we're building an outbound system and it's all tied together. So let's just go from the top. In cold email, what is the environment? So the environment essentially is one, the market conditions which you're operating under. If you're doing HVAC cold outbound, it's going to be much harder than if you're doing tree trimming cold outbound. Why? Because there's a lot of people doing it to HVAC and there's not many people doing it to tree trimming. You can't control what other people are doing, right? But that's the environment that you'd be operating in. Also, what's happening in the space for deliverability at the moment? What's the technological changes that are going on? All these things are the environment, which you cannot control, but you have to build a process and ingredients that fit within that environment. So the input, as I said, was your lead list, and you can get better lead lists and refine your lead lists, okay? The process is going to be what you say in your emails, how frequently you email people, how you do your lead nurturing, how you do your discovery call, how you send Calendly reminders, etc., etc. And the output, you get a few outputs. They're going to be what people say to your emails, what your data says, so your reply rates and all these sorts of things. You're going to be your reply rates, what the data says. It's also going to be what people say on these discovery calls. And that is going to be the most important piece of output that you're going to get, because that's going to provide you with the best information to change the inputs and the process. Then you've got your demo show-up rates, what people say in your demos, your close rates, and essentially how much you're closing people for. And then ultimately, you've got your lifetime value of those customers which you close, all inform this process. And you can use all this data to refine this process. So, like I said, I think this is the most important diagram. It's extremely simple, but it helps convey the point that all you're doing is you're putting inputs into a process and you're getting an output. If the output is not what you want, then you have to either change the inputs or the process, okay? And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk through some of the most common issues that we see the most common outputs that we see, which are not what you want, and how to diagnose them correctly. We have the advantage of working with over 50 B2B companies, not just with generating them calls, but helping them get deals all the way across the line. What this means essentially is we're experts at tasting the cake, seeing the end result of the process, and being able to diagnose where along the process or the inputs there is an issue. That's essentially what we are experts in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run through the most common issues that we see that people run into and how to solve them. So before even looking at any data, I would say what you have to do is just double check your lead list. So get your lead list, open up the top 20 URLs of the companies that are on this lead list, go to each of the URLs and ask yourself the question, if this company wanted to work with me, could I help them? And you're going to need at least 80% yeses. And if you're not getting 80% yeses, let's say you can only help 40% of the companies on the list, you're going to either need to scrape a new list, so go and make tighter parameters on how you scrape the list, or you can take that existing list, put it into Clay, and you're going to use an AI prompt that says, go to this URL, do they, and then whatever parameters you need, do they offer hardscaping services, yes or no? And then all the no's, you will then take out of that list, okay? Once you've done that, and you know that you can help the majority of people on the list, here is looking at the data and what the common issues are. If you're getting a low reply rate, and this means sub 1.5% reply rate, it's either going to be deliverability, so your emails aren't actually landing in the people's primary inbox, or it is going to be that people genuinely do not care about what you're emailing them. So how we solve this is you first just double check deliverability is not a problem. If it is not a problem, then you're going to take your offer and you're going to stretch it to the most compelling offer you can think of. Be that free work with guarantees, okay? You're going to make it super compelling. Once you get to that point, you should start to get replies, and then you can refine it back to something that you're more comfortable with. But what you need to do is you're going to take it all the way to that end of the spectrum. Why? Because if you're not getting replies, it's very hard to diagnose from there. You need to be actually talking to people on the phone, figuring out what their pain points are, figuring out what their problems are, in order to essentially go through this process of the scientific method. The goal then is to get people on the phone so that you can do the tests, okay? And how you're going to do that, if deliverability is not an issue, is you're going to take your offer and you're going to make it the most compelling offer that you can think of. You're going to have to deliver on that, but that's the price you're going to have to pay to understand what the market actually wants and why they're not responding to your emails. Low booked call rate, which for us is around 0.3% or less. So if you're sending 300 emails and you're not getting a call booked, we would say that's a low booked call rate. Typically, if you're getting replies, but you're not booking calls, it's because people don't actually care about what you're emailing them, okay? So what you need to do is from the little calls that you are getting, you need to make sure, one, that you're recording them. You're gonna figure out what it is that the prospect actually wants and what it is that you're saying that's turning the prospect away. If you are talking about SEO and Facebook ads and Google ads and trying to sell them your product, you will turn them off immediately. You're going to treat these calls essentially as ways to generate data so you can understand what the market actually wants, okay? So there's a listening process, and we're going to be going through a discovery call script and figuring out what the market actually wants. Once you have a better understanding of what they want, you're going to go back to your copy and you're going to change your copy to make it more in line with what the market actually wants. And what you'll see is the booked call rate will tick up over time if you keep following this process. The next bottleneck that we often see is a low demo booked call rate. So less than 50% of your discovery calls turn into demos. And this is 99% of the time because you're just not doing the discovery call correctly. If you are talking to somebody that you believe you can help and you follow the discovery call correctly, you should be booking at least 50% of your demos. So go back through your discovery call script and make sure you are following one that is a proven script that does work. Often, what people do is they have only gotten business genuinely through inbound and referrals for years, and they've grown their team and they're and then they try and use that same process when they talk to outbound prospects. And then they're like, these people, they weren't interested in video call, or they didn't show up to the video call, or they said they needed to think about it and I never heard back from them, or I've sent them a proposal and I haven't heard from them. This is because you're using the wrong sales process, okay? So you need to make sure that you're using an outbound script, and if you are, that'll almost definitely solve your demo booking problem. So obviously there's plenty of nuance here and there's plenty more little bottlenecks, which I'm not going to get into in this video. If you are facing a particular bottleneck, feel free to leave it down below and I'll have a look at it and I'll see if there's a quick diagnosis that I can do from our experience. Otherwise, make sure that you follow the scientific method if you're running into bottlenecks. Be like Myra. Peace.